All right. Well, welcome. We have some people that are coming in still, but in an interest of time in the evening, we have a lot ahead of us. We're going to go and get started. So thank you so much for joining us. My name is Emily Loeb, and I'm the Director of Programs and Education at the Holocaust Center of Pittsburgh, which is a program of the Tree of Life. If you are new to us this evening, welcome. Our mission is to connect the history of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism with the injustices of today. And through education, we strive to empower individuals to build a more civil and humane society. We organize school-based and community-facing programs and trainings, innovative exhibits, engaging lectures and events like the one tonight, and other educational opportunities that help students, educators, and the general public gain a deeper understanding of the Holocaust and anti-Semitism. One of the most effective ways we can help people understand these complex topics is by connecting them to real people. And tonight's program is an example of that approach. Tonight's event is part of our RAD Days, and we're grateful to the Allegheny Regional Asset District for supporting our work. We're excited to be offering 2 RAD Days programs this year, and we hope you'll join us on October 29th for a talk with Eric Marcus on the persecution of the LGBTQ+ community during the Nazi era. At the Holocaust Center, we strive to bring programming to the community that's engaging, relevant, and accessible. Tonight's program is free, and we're able to offer programs like this only because of the generous support of organizations, foundations, and community members. If you would like to make a donation, we'd greatly appreciate it, and you can stop by the table on your way out or visit our donation page or ask me if you have any questions. So we are really fortunate to be part of a strong community, and tonight's co-sponsors include not just the Holocaust Center, but as I said, the Tree of Life, of which we're a program, the Regional Asset District, Carnegie Mellon University's History Department, Jewish Studies and Holocaust Chairs, the University of Pittsburgh Jewish Studies Department, Classrooms Without Borders, and Rodef Shalom. We're also glad to have Riverstone Books here selling Inseparable, the book about Marion's family. I want to take a moment to thank the Tree of Life staff for assisting tonight with this program, and especially my colleagues at the Holocaust Center, Christina Sahovi, Julia Gaetano, and Noah Schoen, who put so much time and energy into making all of our programs possible. We hope that after the program, you will join us for a dessert reception in Erin Court. And now for tonight's program. I want to make sure that everyone silences their phones, because we always have this issue. So if you take a moment and just make sure your phone is silenced, that would be great. We are truly honored to be joined by Marion Ein Lewin. This program has been a very long time in the making. Carol Zawatsky, the CEO of Tree of Life, is a dear friend of Marion's, and at a holiday party last year, they began discussing the possibility of Marion coming to Pittsburgh for a Holocaust Center program. After numerous emails, meetings, and finding a date that works for everyone, here we are, and apparently, judging by this crowd, it was a good date to choose. Marion Ein Lewin was born in the Netherlands to parents who were driven from their home in Germany in 1935 by Nazi anti-Semitism and violence. Marion, her parents, and twin brother Steven remained together throughout the Holocaust, one of only a very few families to do so. They survived the transit camp Westerbork, concentration camp Bergen Belsen, and a perilous journey on the lost train in the last few days of the war. The family was liberated by Soviet soldiers on April 23, 1945. Arriving in the United States in 1947, Marion went on to graduate from Barnard College and Columbia University. Her professional life focused on health policy and health economics, and for 15 years, she was the senior staff officer at the Institute of Medicine at the National Academies of Science and headed its Office of Health Policy Programs and Fellowships. Her family's story of Ferris Castle's book is the subject of Ferris Castle's book, Inseparable, the Hess twins' Holocaust journey through Bergen Belsen to America. And I can attest, it's excellent. We are deeply honored to have Marion here to share her story with us tonight. Please join me in welcoming her and after her remarks, we'll have time for some questions. Marion?
Yep. Thank you very much. It is truly a pleasure and honor for me to be with you here at Road of Shalom and talk about my family's improbable and miraculous Holocaust journey and the book Inseparable that recounts our story and places it in the broader context of World War II as it unfolded in the Netherlands and its neighboring countries. The author of the book is Faris Castle, a talented and award-winning author. And if I have time, I'll talk a little bit about the actual writing of the book, because I never met the author until the book was published, and we were at our first book event, because this is all the years of COVID, when everything was done by phone or writing. But before I go any further, there are some people I want to thank. Individuals who have made this visit to Pittsburgh truly special and meaningful in their dedication to tonight's program and their highly professional and gracious tending to its every detail has been truly exceptional. First on the list is Carol Zawadzki, head of the Tree of Life Foundation, and with whom I worked when she served with great distinction as executive director of the Washington, D.C. JCC. Carol and I bumped into each other at last year's Hanukkah party at the White House, and I hadn't seen her for a while, and I told her about the book. And soon after my visit with her, she made these connections, and so I give her special thanks to be here this evening with all of you. I want to thank Emily Loeb and her staff, and simply say that now, after having done over 25 book events all over the country, I have never worked with someone as caring and capable as Emily. Very special thanks also go to Patty Kenner, a nationally recognized and beloved philanthropist of Jewish and other important societal causes. Patty has been a muse and a great advocate of Inseparable, and for which I'm most grateful. She serves on the board and is an alumni of CMU. Last night, I had the joy of speaking to some of his students and meeting Inika Walke, their associate professor of Holocaust Studies, a new position funded by Patty's Family Foundation. How did the book Inseparable come to be? That needs a word of explanation, because until about 10 years ago, I never talked about my Holocaust background. Not that I did not remember it, even after all these years. There's hardly a day when some memory or recollection does not cross my mind. I never thought my words could do the story justice. Why was I and my entire family saved when so many others, 6 million, among them 1.5 million children, perished? So when my family came to America in 1947, we wanted to start life anew, wrap our arms around America, the land of freedom and opportunity. We felt so lucky and blessed to be here. We were 9 years old, actually, and had never been to school. So we went to school, but the first 6 months we were taken to some event almost every other day. We met the head of the United Nations, Eleanor Roosevelt, the mayor of New York, one thing after another, which I really didn't even fully understand at the time because I didn't speak English very well. But one day I came home and told my mother, we've never been to school, and we're 9 years old, and now we're in school, but we're never there because we're taken to all these events. And she said, well, you know, people want to do special things for you because you and your brother are Holocaust survivors and twins, and so they want to honor you and show you things that are new and wonderful. And I said to my mother, but I don't always want to be known as a Holocaust survivor. I want to be known as an American girl. And, you know, in a way, that conflict stood with me. Of course, I will always be a Holocaust survivor. I will always feel especially blessed that I survived the Holocaust, and my whole family did. But on the other hand, when you go through an experience like that, you want to grab the world and learn and discover and see, and you know, there's all these things that you feel that you've missed, and so I did want to be an American girl. Then one day, but so life went on, and my life went on, and I went on to other things, but of course, funded the Holocaust Museum, always went to the special events. Then one day, about 5 years ago, I was inspired to write what became an op-ed article in the Los Angeles Times, and it was entitled, "My Childhood Memories of the Holocaust in a World of COVID-19." And it was a story about that, and it was during COVID. And I focused on the courage, the selflessness, and compassion of the first responders risking their lives to save others. And it made me remember people in the camp who, despite being in a hell, you cannot say anything less than that, kept their humanity, their compassion, their caring for others. And so I saw that similarity. The op-ed piece had some resonance and was followed less than a year later by a front-page spread written by Steven Lopez, an award in the LA Times, an award-winning Pulitzer Prize journalist who, through extensive interviews, told more of our story and actually found details that we did not know. So it was kind of a wonderful event for him to do all this research. And among the things he found, he connected us, and he did find our nanny when we were little. We had this beloved, most courageous nanny who risked her life to take care of us in Amsterdam, even when it was forbidden for us to go to a park or playground. And then shortly thereafter, a publisher expressed strong interest in putting out a book on our Holocaust journey. With the nanny was also very touching, the daughters of the nanny, because Steve Lopez interviewed them, and the nanny's daughter said, my mother loved her job of taking care of children, but some of them she really bonded with, and that's why my sister is called Marion, which was, and of course my name is Marion, so that was kind of a wonderful discovery. Our Holocaust journey, it was truly a tale of horror and slaughter, but also a story of hope, resilience, and overcoming. So let me show you some slides, because I know the time is relatively short, and I'm so eager to hear your questions. And as we go through the slides, I can relate some more specifics about our story. So that is supposed to be a rendition of my brother and me. The clothes are strange. I remember the clothes I wore in the Holocaust because I wore them for 2.5 years. But in any case, Ferris Castle, who lives on the West Coast and is an award-winning author, a very talented author. And what she did, which was such a gift to our history, is put our experience in Bergen Belsen in the context of World War II at that time, what was happening in Holland and what was happening in other countries, neighboring countries. Okay, let's move to the next one. Okay, so this was Margaretje, our wonderful nanny, with her daughter Ellen, and the other daughter is Marion. And there was my mother in 1938 with the twins. You know, twins were not as common at that time. And this is a very meaningful and powerful picture. This was my mother's parents, Fanny and Willie Hirschberg, and it was, they got an 8-hour pass to visit their new grandchildren. My grandparents on my mother's side were the lay Jewish leaders of their town, and shortly thereafter, when they saw us, this was in 1938, we had Kristallnacht, and my grandfather was on the board of, the head of the board of the synagogue, and of course the synagogue was totally destroyed. And he and some other board members went to the synagogue to see that was on fire, to see if there's anything they could do. And he was beaten and arrested and actually put in prison for a short period of time. And shortly thereafter, he had a heart attack. But what he did before he passed away was, since people had no synagogue to go to, he made a sanctuary in their house. They happened to have had a large house so that people had a chance to worship. And at first he only put extra furniture around the house for the sanctuary, but in the little time he had, he actually put, special rugs and Judaica, so that it was not only a place to meet, it was really a sanctuary. My mother, who even at that time was a well-known business woman, she was the buyer of women's clothing, and often went to Berlin. My father was head of the local department store. And she ended up in a terrible, terrible camp, Stutthof, and she perished there. And one thing I think about of people in the Holocaust, when you are in a camp, your life, as far as what happens to anyone else, what happens in the rest of the world, what happens anywhere, you're totally isolated. You have no idea where anyone is, any of your loved ones are. And I think of my mother, who was a beloved only child, and I think of her, thinking of she knew that my grandfather had passed away, but she never knew what happened to her mother. And now we have cell phones and we have so much communication. To be in a camp and to just wonder about what's happened to my sister, my mother, my father, and to be just met with a wall of unknowing and a wall of silence. My mother only found out about what happened to her mother was after the war, when she put an ad in the paper. Did anyone remember Fanny Hirschberg? And then she discovered where she had been. And she survived almost the entire war, but then was murdered shortly before the camps were liberated. Okay. So here we are with my father in 1941. People say, do you remember anything about your childhood? We were young. We were taken away when we were 5, close to 6. But I have a lot of memories. I really remember the windmills and the tulips and skating on the ice. Holland at that time it's such a picturesque country, and it's very much a country for children because it's so scenic and so small and intimate. And so I remember these days, they were joyous days, but I also remember when things changed, when all of a sudden people who were smiling were frowning and looked anxious, when everyone in my parents' circle, packed a suitcase and had it ready at the front door in case the time came when you were taken away and you knew you had to put all your possessions in one suitcase. And I remember, of course, the night that we were picked up, and it was basically in the middle of the night. I remember it because I'd never heard such a loud noise in our beautiful apartment. And of course, those were these boots that the Nazis wore, that were up to their knees and made a lot of noise. And of course, they spoke in a very loud and aggressive tone, German, which my parents, who had come from Germany to escape Hitler, knew, but for me it was new. And you had to rush and get dressed, and it seemed even at my age very scary and very ominous. But I remember vividly that my parents always put candies in a wooden shoe next to our beds. So when we woke up in the morning, we would see these treats. Probably dentists in the current age would not encourage that. But I remember as we rushed out the door, and the Nazis saying, "Schnell, schnell, schnell." I asked my mother, "Can I take the candies out of the shoe?" And my mother said, "Well, if you do it quickly and put it in your pocket, you can do that." And I think of that. Those are the last candies I ate for quite a while. Okay, and the next one. Oh, yes. So this was actually the picture that went a little bit viral. This was a picture that was in the op-ed piece. And someone in Los Angeles recognized the costume. These are traditional Dutch costumes. Our nanny, who came from a small town, always wore traditional dress, even though she was in Amsterdam, where people were more modern and, of course, wore regular clothing. And she always wished that she could have a picture of us as twins in traditional dress. And so she bought these. They were handmade by her family. And we put them on. This was very shortly before we were picked up. This picture was taken. And so when I wrote the op-ed piece, it had that picture in there. And so, somehow it got to be, recognized. And then as a result, this is the long article that Steve Lopez wrote. Okay. By the way, I just want to say, so my parents decided to invite a well-known photographer to take this picture. I don't think they realized, this would be the last picture before we were taken away. And they invited a distinguished photographer. And the same day, this photographer was murdered by the Nazis because he also took pictures for fraudulent passports in order for the Dutch to escape, some people to escape. And these were the passport pictures that needed to be part of that document. And of course, he and a few other people who were doing these kinds of things were rounded up and shot. And he was actually murdered the same night of the day that he took that photograph. Okay. So this was Kristallnacht, which I just talked about, and my grandfather's role. And, he remembered that shortly thereafter, everyone had to hand in their radio, so they could no longer communicate or hear what was happening in the rest of the world. And he also remembered how people came around and took all the Judaica that people had, because, first of all, they were very important to the people who owned them, but also they were very valuable. But, the taking of the Judaica, it was everything to kind of, rob you of your identity, of your tradition, of the things of your family. Judaica is usually handed down. So, it was, you could see how slowly the world just fell apart for Jews living in Europe. Okay. So this was Westerbork, where we were taken. That was kind of a holding camp, a detention camp run by the Germans, and this was in Holland. And it was in a place almost bordering Germany. And this was the way it looked. And all these camps, Westerbork even, and certainly Bergen Belsen, they, in the beginning, they were survivable, but then soon everything became so overcrowded, like in Bergen Belsen. That was meant to be a camp for 14,000 people, and ended up having 60,000 people. So that's what happened, and then of course, between the disease and the starvation and the worsening conditions, that was a great cause of rapid death and destruction. That's about all that you can say. So this was Westerbork, and the interesting thing is about Westerbork was the commandant of this was basically a horrible man, but he was a lover of opera and the musicals. That was his passion. And so there was a lot of music in the camp in the beginning. And of course, the cream of Jewish artists, musicians were in these camps. And so in the beginning, amazingly enough, they put on these amazing performances by very talented people. And it also was allowed because, the Nazis, they tried to lull people into feeling that this was kind of a normal environment. They didn't want people to be panicked more than they were already panicked. So you had these amazing dichotomies, suffering and entertainment. Okay. So these were the cattle cars, and I remember we were on them twice. Once when we were moved to Bergen Belsen, and once when we were on the Lost Train, which was, and all of these things are amazing stories that would take another hour. So I'm going to have to skip over them, but perhaps they'll come out in the questions. So, what was really amazing was, for example, Westerbork. Westerbork, they had the Tuesday and Thursday trains. They were the dreaded trains. The train would come in the morning like clockwork. And it was ordered that there were either 650 or 500 or 400 people were listed to be on that train. And, it couldn't be one more or less. They were very methodical about making sure that everything ran the way they wanted to. And so the people, the night before, and I remember in Westerbork, when the list was read, the tears ran, the screams of anguish, because nobody knew where they were going. There was a rumor, because people, Jews, and we had them too, that when you were picked up, you had to have warm clothes and sturdy shoes. And the belief was that you were going to go to a country like the kibbutz and help with the farming and have good, heavy shoes. But then that would just be temporary. You know, you'd come back. And of course, there was no coming back for people on these trains. And so you just boarded them, and there was no idea. After a while, you know, there was something dreaded about the train, and people realized that these were trains of horror and murder because you never heard from these people again. Okay. You're very good on the slide. All right, and so this is Bergen Belsen. How can I describe it? Cold, miserable, wet. But, you know, Bergen Belsen was not an extermination camp. It was a slave labor camp. But even there, the Germans calculated to the month or the week how long someone could last under these conditions of deprivation. And according to their calculation, you know, children, there were never that many children, but there were quite a few at Bergen Belsen, could last about a year. And, you know, a grown-up doing slave labor could last about 8 or 9 months, and so they calculated that. They kind of, you know, were just aware exactly what they were doing. So this is, I think, a telling picture, because it's women from Bergen Belsen peeling something or eating something, and what is the backdrop? A mass grave, hundreds of corpses. And this was our life. You know, my twin brother and I learned to count by counting corpses in front of our barrack. And, you know, that sounds horrific. And of course it is horrific, but that was our life. It was like seeing cars parked in front of your door. So, you know, when I came to America shortly thereafter, my best friend at the school was African American, and her grandmother had died, and she invited me to the funeral. And I was so amazed that, you know, there was a funeral, I mean, a big dedication and a ceremony for one person. And I came home and told my mother I went to something amazing where someone was buried individually, because I had never known that someone can be graced by their individuality and be remembered by their parents. All that we ever saw were these mass graves. But, you know, you become indifferent because every day you struggle so hard to survive yourself. And so these were the barracks. My brother and I, so when we first came, we had to share one of these bunk beds with somebody else. But then as it became more crowded, it was 3 people. Now, of course, we all had lost weight. My brother and I were always first people selected by other people to, quote, sleep with them because we were so skinny and so small that we wouldn't take much space. So we were the desired bedmates. But near the end of the war, when you know, there was no place for any warmth, even those beds, the slats were taken out and used as firing wood to you know, to have some warmth during these horrible winter months. And you see and you know, this was the condition. Okay, so we can move to the next one. So we were on the Lost train. So we had been in Bergen Belsen for about a year, and the war was coming to a close. And the Nazis wanted to cover up the evidence. And so they took about 2,500 people on 3 trains, and nobody really knew where these trains would go. Some felt that they would go to Auschwitz and the gas chambers, but that was no longer possible because the gas chambers had been destroyed because the Russians were moving from east to west. And then people thought we would go to Theresienstadt, and we didn't end up there either. So it was a lost train. The 2 other trains, there were 3 trains. One was liberated the next day, and the other one was liberated by the Americans a short time later. But this train, our train, traveled for 13 days, and a third of the people on the train died because there was no water, no food, no sanitation. And it was finally liberated by the Soviet army after 13 days in a small town, Turbitz. But those 13 days were memorable to me because, first of all, the resilience and the creativity of my parents. So the train kept on stopping because at that time, the tracks had been, the railroad tracks all over had been mostly bombed, so there was only one track, and so you were sidelined so often because a train was trying to come from east to west, and you were still going from west to east. And when the train would stop, it sometimes would stop for a day, and people went into the fields looking for any food, a potato, anything. And we actually started eating the bark of trees. I remember whatever tree it was, it had a very sweet bark and leaves. And I remember that my mother was amazing, that she had with her a small sterno, which I guess she got in the camp or even before the camp. I don't know how she got this little sterno. And when my father brought potatoes, she would go under the locomotive and catch the hot water that was coming from the locomotive so that over a long time she could cook a potato. And these were the kind of the lengths people could to stay alive, and their kind of courage and their resilience. It wasn't only my parents. I think my parents were exemplars of that, but there were other people as well. But nevertheless, a third of the people died on the train, and they had no burial ground. They were just, taken off the train and left beside the railroad tracks. So we traveled on the Queen Elizabeth, which at that time was a luxury liner. And I thought I'd entered paradise. To be somewhere where you had a white sheet and towels. And my brother reminded me that we didn't go first class, we were third class. But to me, it was kind of a miracle voyage. So we came to America in 1947. And this was my mother. As you can see, she always wanted to look her best. And this was a little house that we bought a few years after we came to America. As you see, it's kind of an empty field. But there she was. And here is an ashtray which my mother bought for my father. Unfortunately, my father was a smoker. And for his first birthday after we were liberated back in Amsterdam, she bought him this ashtray, which says in Dutch, "Vanavond worden wir niet gehaald." And I have this now on my living room. It's really a precious object, and that means tonight we will not be taken. That you can spend the night at rest and at peace. I feel that most survivors weren't able to accomplish that after what they went through. But you know, that tonight nobody will get us. So that is the story in shorthand, but I'm so eager to have a conversation, and so maybe we can do that. Thank you very much. Yeah, she's not done. Oh, I do what? You know, before the first question, I want to read a poem. My mother, when she passed away, my mother always had a way with words. And after she passed away, we found a folder that had remarkable poems that she had written and not shared with anyone. They were all autobiographical and all kind of particularly wonderful and meaningful to her life and, of course, our life. So in this mess of paper now, I want to read a poem that is in this book that really summarizes the story that I just related. So the trouble is that if I read it in the book, it's going to, I'm so sorry. Well, you know what, let me try to read it, if I can have some light. My mother, because of the war, maybe a phone light.
I got you.
Perfect. Now I have to find the, my mother, as a result of the camp and kind of a terrible case of typhus, had very bad eyesight. And she was always struggling to see and read. And so she wrote in this collection of poems something called Ode to My Eyes. I lived 3 lives, 3 times I died. You wonder why I can't sleep at night. Very often I think my eyes are fine, just saw too much to really shine. Instead of beauty, they had to see what men could do to history. Instead of watching the golden sunrise, they had to look at madman's eyes. Instead of weeping real tears, their tears dried up before their years. They worked the hardest, desiring the best. That's what they got by taking a rest and seeing only what they wanted to see. I carry them, but they owe me. They punished and haunted me for all the horrors they had to see. Since they could have given up on me years ago, I am grateful for them, not quite happy though. Yet, as a reward for a valiant fight, they now and again let me read and write. In their eyes, they let me win this fight. But we made peace, whatever will be. They promised they would always stay with me, as long as I'll go with them instead of they with me. So I think it's a beautiful poem and very meaningful.
Okay, do you want to go sit and I will start? Okay. Are these on? Okay, so we're now going to do some questions. Noah and my colleague Christina are going to run microphones, and we're going to do questions until about 7:35, and then we have a group of students here with Mr. Luco's class who wanted to take some photos, or photo with Marion, and then we're going to go into Aaron Court for a light dessert reception and talking and hanging out. So, Noah, where are you? Oh, there you go. So just raise your hand if you have a question.
I have a question. Questions? Maybe we'll begin with students. Oh, sure.
Can you tell us a little bit about your time after you were liberated from Bergen Belsen? when you returned to Amsterdam, how life was
Okay,
coming
just
back.
could you translate them?
You wanted to hear a little bit about your life in Amsterdam? He's after, sorry.
In Bergen Belsen?
Returning. What was it like to return?
To Amsterdam
Right.
after liberation before you came back.
Right, right. Well, that's a good question. Because, I still go back to Amsterdam. I try to go there every year because I still have one or two kind of, I consider them family, friends there. And I always, when I come to Amsterdam or Holland, I always say, why am I going back to this country? They treated me so horribly. So it is a good, it is a good question. The first thing was that when we came back, we were, my parents didn't have any, they were people without a country. They didn't have a passport. And so the only country that we knew was Holland. I mean, they were not going to go back to Germany. But, there was a lot of actually hatred by that time of anyone German, even though we were Jews. And so we were actually put in detention when we got there instead of welcomed and helped. So it was, it was a very mixed return. I mean, after a while we were released. And we, first of all, we only were there for over a year before we came to America. So it was just, finding a place to live. And my father actually at that time wrote his memoirs in forms of letters to his family. His family escaped earlier and ended up mostly in America and Israel, but my mother's family was totally wiped out. And, her mother came from a family of 21 children. And it's astonishing that only two survived after the war. And so, I remember, my father was a smoker, and so I don't know, people sent him Philip Morris cigarettes or oranges from Israel. He couldn't return to a job at that time. And we all had health problems, and so that detained our visas. So it was, I would say, it was, we were liberated, we were alive. We could start life anew. But I think my parents knew that they didn't want to stay there. And it was also a very painful time because, your family, there were so many people that were missing at the table. So it was, it was kind of a waiting station of wanting to come to America, our time in Amsterdam after the war.
I have two questions, please. One, I understand, here I am, so you could look at me. That most,
Stand up.
you want me to stand?
Yeah.
Most families were separated during the war. It's my understanding from what you've said this evening is that you were always together with your family. And then the other question is, did you have sponsors? Is that how you got to the United States?
Okay. Well, I'll go backward. Yes, that was one of the problems. And, one thing that they've discovered that, there were many visas available, but people didn't fill them. And one reason was that, to come to America. So we did have a sponsor. We had an Aunt Carrie, Tante Carrie, who everyone was forever thankful for because she did that for quite a few in our family. And so this was a promise, if someone supported you, that you would never apply for welfare, that someone would, that you would pay for yourselves, you would not be a dependent on this country for support. And we did have that kind of visa. And then you ask me, yes, we were together. And so, you know, in a way, well, Bergen Belsen was a terrible place, but it was not, you know, a place where your murder was assured within a short period of time, especially if you were a child, because, you know, people only wanted slave laborers, people who could do something. Children were totally, you know, they were good for nothing. But Bergen Belsen, and so like in Auschwitz or Sobibor, I mean, children didn't last very long. I mean, they were exterminated very quickly. But we were very lucky, if you can be lucky, we were lucky, that we were picked up rather late in 1944. And so that if we had been picked up, you know, a year before, all of the trains from Holland went to Sobibor or Auschwitz, and I would not be here speaking to you tonight. But then there were some trains, only a few, about 8 trains that went to Bergen Belsen, which was a camp that came online. It had been a prisoner of war camp before that came online, and many Dutch Jews ended up there. And we were not in the same barracks, but we were, I mean, it wasn't like Auschwitz, you know, a huge camp and subcamps. You know, it's not that we saw my father every day, but we did see him occasionally because it wasn't such a big camp, but it was separated, the men and the women. But because we were small, we were with my mother. I have to tell you an amazing story about my father. I have to tell you 2 amazing stories, and I hope I'm not preventing a lot of questions, but they are worthwhile. My father was always a leader. People always, and you know, he wasn't, you know, immensely tall or immensely, you know, kind of big and impressive. He was extremely handsome, and he didn't look at all Jewish. He had blonde hair and blue eyes. But he was always considered a leader. And so he was head of a commando, a slave labor commando that had a terrible job building a road or some very kind of laborious and life-threatening labor. And he always told the people working for him that when the Nazis weren't looking, that they should try to take a little rest. And so, of course, when the Nazis were patrolling, you know, they better do whatever they had to do quickly. But one day he was caught, and so someone heard him say that, and they took him and really left him for dead. He was put in a, you know, in cold water and beaten with truncheons and bones broken, et cetera, et cetera. And when he was returned to the camp by some fellow prisoners, my mother could only recognize him by the wedding ring that he was still wearing. I mean, in Belsen, sometimes, I mean, you couldn't have diamonds, but some people still had wedding rings. And I remember that I was allowed to see him at one point. And I saw him, and of course he was very weak, and he had all these broken bones. But we had a good conversation, and he said, "Would you help me shave?" And I said, "Yes, but what can I do?" And he actually had a blade, and he asked me to hold up the lid of a tin can so he could see. And that was so my father. You know, even in that position, he felt that he did not want to be degraded. You know, he wanted the dignity of still being a human being. And I always remember that. I also remember that he asked me, he said, "Zus, if we ever get out of here, what would you like? What do you dream of most?" And I said, "A whole loaf of bread." That was my wish at the time. But, you know, that was kind of a great memory of my father. So I don't know if I answered your question. We were together, but really we were apart.
Irene, Christina, where are you? Noah?
Yeah.
Can you get Irene? And while he's bringing the thing over, I'm going to tell you, Veronica, who just asked that question, her parents were in Bergen Belsen.
Oh.
Also.
Oh,
I hope that's okay, I just said that.
Can you tell us what your days looked like for you and your brother? How did you spend your time? What did you do? Just what was it like being in the camp for two little kids?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you several stories because my mother had to go. She was in a shoe commando. She, of course, had to leave. So, you know, the very oldest people, women in the barrack, were left to take care of us. And my mother said that there were, you know, these very old ladies who would complain to my mother. You know, your children are very unruly. They don't have anything to do when you're gone, and so they just kind of run around and make noise. But we actually did do some things. First of all, we developed a secret language, which when I came to this country, I realized was a version of Pig Latin. So we felt that we spoke, you know, something that nobody else was able to speak. I'm not sure that was true. You know what we did for hours? We took the lights out of our hair and put them in a line and counted them. That's a little bit how we learned to count, and who to do the straightest line. We love doing that because when you take lights out of your hair, they kind of crack. You know, it's like a little bit like a noisemaker. You know, which is another. But you know, you were so dehumanized. Nobody ever said your name. You know, people that took care of us, I mean, the officers and the Nazis, you know, they called you Schwein, pig, or Hund, dog. So, you know, even you were always, you know, that was it, a life-taking. And, you know, we did other things. One day I saved my brother. He even acknowledges that I did, because, you know, there was strafing over the camp where the Allies who were already, you know, kind of taking control of the war and winning the war, they would strafe the camp not knowing whether it was an enemy place or what it was. So one day there was serious strafing where several people in the barrack died and perished. And somehow I dragged my brother, who was much weaker than I was. He had terrible ear infections. And so I dragged him, and somehow I knew that we should go somewhere, and this was a bathroom, if you could call a bathroom. I mean, that was the worst thing, you know, to go to the bathroom. But I went there because I felt it would be safer. And it was, because I pushed his head under a sink. And of course, whatever the sink was made of, it was sturdier than the flimsy wood in our barrack. And I remember that for our 6th birthday, we got from my parents, we got 2 slices of bread with butter and chocolate sprinkles. Chocolate sprinkles was a great specialty food for children in Holland. And I don't know how my parents were able to do that, what they traded or bartered to get this. And I remember my brother and I ate it for about a month. You know, we'd eat several crumbs a day, but never took a real bite because we wanted it to last as long as it could. And maybe just another story is many, many years after the camp, when I was much older, I got a letter from someone who I knew who was our age when we were in the camp. I'm a little older, maybe 2 or 3 years older, and she had already lost her mother, and she came to Belsen with her father, and so of course she was separated from her father, and she wanted very much to be our friends, and she wrote me a letter of what she remembered, and she said what was unusual about the two of you was, first of all, we were twins, but that somehow we each had a toy, which was something I don't remember. We had a toy, and that was very unique. But then she also said, and I remembered it with such humor, she says, and Marion, you never like to get your clothing dirty. That was quite amusing in a place like that. And so she told me that I gave people lessons on how to make food last. And that was, you ate out of these camelons, these huge garbage pans. And so, the top was very thin. The bottom had some, in the beginning it had horse meat, and then it was kohlrabies, et cetera, et cetera. So I was teaching children how to go to the bottom of this can. The can was taller than I was. And how to kind of, with your fingers, lick the bottom of the can, of the garbage can, to get some food. But I always said, but always roll up your sleeves. You don't want to get them dirty. So I hadn't remembered that. It was quite amusing.
How about we do one more, and then we'll go do the photo and then into the reception. Noah, do you see in the middle?
This hour, I shed a tear, my heart fluttered with a poem, and then a sense of rage that we're here for this reason to go over all of this. And then I fast forward 77 years from Kristallnacht, and there's only 4 million of us in this country, and yet the meteoric rise in Jew hatred just kind of keeps me up at night. So from your perspective, New York City, the epicenter of maybe Jewish culture in this country, has a mayor now that wants to diversify or separate himself from Israeli investment, encourage BDS, and then basically globalize the intifada. And yet 35% of the Jews in New York are going to vote for him. You lived it, you experienced it, can never again happen again, and what do we do about it?
It's kind of, so I didn't hear all of it.
He was basically asking about the rise of anti-Semitism.
Yeah. Well, it is the case that, they say never forget, and we have to remember because people have forgotten, and some of the things that we felt anti-Semitism, will never disappear. But you have to say, why is it that that after all that people have seen, the biggest murder, the biggest theft of the Jewish people, do we see it come to rise? I think part of it is, I think it all comes to education and setting an example. There's not even an adequate answer, because I think there's something about humankind. We do such amazing things, but at some level, there's always, I think, an undertow of prejudice. And so there's, I can't really answer it, but we have to be aware, and to the degree that I think we remember the Holocaust, and that we can teach people and enlighten people, that's really all we can do, and hope that it'll have an effect. So I apologize. I don't know, I'm at a loss for an answer.
Thank you.
Thank you.